It didn't begin on the day of betrayal, nor on the night when she found herself alone in the empty house. It started long before that, with tiny cracks unnoticed at first, with dismissive glances, cold touches, promises that burned to ashes before they were ever fulfilled. It all began with silence. That very silence that slowly eats away at the walls between people, until only the echo of footsteps and the empty clink of spoons in a cup remain. She was a woman of patience. Not because she didn't know how to take revenge, but because she knew that true revenge demands time. Rash acts are for the weak. For those who don't know how to wait, don't know how to watch, don't know how to prepare the ground. She waited. For years. Quietly, calmly, like a predator in the grass. And when it all ended and he left, leaving behind coldness, debts, and lies, she remained. Not for him, but to remember, to absorb every speck of pain, every shattered illusion, every moment when she believed things could still be good. He thought he had left victorious, thought he had crushed, erased, ruined, that nothing could grow from it anymore. But he didn't understand one thing. Pain is a seed. If planted deep, watered with tears, and fertilized with loneliness, it grows into something far scarier than simple disappointment. It grows into a plan. She started small. She moved away, changed her name, deleted old connections, disappeared. Not to hide, but to become invisible, to watch his life from afar, to study who he was with now, where he lived, who he trusted, who he smiled at. None of this was nostalgia. She wasn't longing. What they had was dead long before the final goodbye. This was curiosity, like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. He rose. Career, recognition, a new family. From the outside, everything looked right. Happy. But she knew that decay isn't visible from the outside. She knew how he could lie, how he could seduce, how he built a perfect picture behind which lay emptiness. He hadn't changed. He just put on a new costume. Now it was the suit of a respected man, but inside, the cowardice, greed, and coldness remained. She didn't want blood. She didn't want death. She wanted to break him from the inside, so no one could see it. So he wouldn't even realize how he started to fall apart. So he would lose not things but meaning. So he would wake in cold sweat, not understanding where the fear came from. So he would look in the mirror and not recognize himself. The path was long. She got a job in a company where he held shares. Not directly, of course. Through third parties, different names, shell companies. She worked meticulously, attracting no suspicion. Showing initiative but not overstepping. She immersed herself in the system. Studied the structure. Memorized vulnerabilities. She made the right acquaintances. Found those who were also dissatisfied with him. There were many. He had crossed many paths without noticing how they were building resentment. She didn't need to push. She just needed to organize. Pick the right time. Set a mirror so they could see who to direct their anger at. She found the woman he had cheated on a contract. The man who was never paid. The colleague he had sacrificed for his own gain. All these people shared one thing, disbelief in their own power for revenge. She gave them belief. And a plan. A series of strange coincidences began. Small problems in his business. Audits. Anonymous complaints. Documentation errors. Letters supposedly from him, but twisted in meaning. Questions from partners. Distrust. She left no traces. Every blow was delivered by other hands. Every step was calculated. At the same time, she penetrated his personal life. Through his circle. Through people he never paid attention to. Servants. Secretaries. Old acquaintances forgotten by him. Chance meetings orchestrated with minute precision. Rumors dropped casually but in the right ear. He began to get nervous. It showed in his eyes. In how often he looked over his shoulder. How he lost composure in meetings. How he suspected those closest to him. He didn't understand where it started. At first he thought competitors. Then an inside conspiracy. Then family problems. But he couldn't find the source because the source was not outside. She watched. Unhurriedly. Calmly. Coldly. Like a surgeon removing a tumor. It did not bring joy. Did not cause euphoria. It was simply necessary. Revenge was not an act of emotion. It was a process. Long, slow. Precise. He began losing his reputation. Those who once trusted him now doubted. Those who admired him started questioning. Those indifferent suddenly noticed. He tried to fight, search for enemies, change strategy, but his efforts only worsened things. Like a fly in a web, he struggled, entangled further. She did not interfere. She just continued. Every step like a chess move. Without words, without fuss. And when he finally understood he was losing everything, that was only the middle of the path. Because ahead was not just loss of business or status. Ahead was losing himself. His identity, his belief in his own invulnerability, his confidence that he could hurt and get away with it. She knew revenge was not a loud finale. It was the silence in which a man is left alone, without allies, without support, without strength. It was the moment when he first realizes, this is no accident. This is retribution. And she was just beginning. The world that once seemed solid beneath his feet began to crumble without warning. Foundations cracked in silence, and every step he took echoed in a growing void. No one reached out with help. No one offered an explanation. He was left to face the disintegration alone. The slow dismantling of everything he had built, everything he thought was his. She remained a shadow, watching from a distance. Her presence was not loud or ostentatious. It was the absence of safety where he expected it, the inexplicable failures in carefully laid plans. A misplaced contract, a forgotten meeting, a whispered suspicion that spread like wildfire. She was in the cracks between moments, the spaces where trust should have lived but instead bred doubt. His allies grew distant. Invitations to exclusive events stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. He noticed how his words were questioned, his decisions doubted. Meetings once filled with agreement turned to subtle resistance. The empire he thought invincible was showing signs of decay, not from outside forces, but from within. Behind closed doors, whispers of scandal began to circulate. Anonymous emails found their way to the press, hinting at unethical practices, financial misdeeds, betrayals long buried. Each revelation was a stone dropped into the pond, causing ripples that spread and grew. He tried to fight back with denials, with threats, with explanations that fell flat. His voice, once commanding, now trembled with desperation. Yet the most painful wounds were not in business or reputation. They were in the small, personal betrayals that chipped away at his confidence. He found that the people closest to him no longer stood by his side. Trust, which had been his currency, was bankrupt. Friends became strangers. Partners became enemies. Loneliness settled in like a thick fog, choking out warmth and light. She knew this was the true victory. To isolate him. To leave him stranded in a sea of doubt and suspicion. To make him question every smile, every handshake, every promise. To create a prison not made of walls, but of fear and paranoia. This was the art of her revenge, slow, deliberate, and absolute. His nights grew restless. Sleep became a stranger. Shadows in the corners of his vision whispered accusations. Every phone ring was a threat. Every knock on the door, a warning. He no longer knew who to trust. The man who once wielded power with ease was now a prisoner of his own mind. She watched as he spiraled, never intervening directly. The plan required patience, and she had it in abundance. The rush of instant revenge had long passed. Now was the time for quiet destruction. Each moment of his despair was a brushstroke in a dark masterpiece she was painting. Amidst the chaos, she built a new life. Stronger, more resilient. The woman who had vanished was now a force. She surrounded herself with allies of her own. Those who had suffered at his hands. Those who craved justice in their own ways. Together, they formed a network of strength and resolve, bound by a shared desire to see the man fall. But she remained the unseen hand guiding the pieces. The architect of his ruin. The keeper of the silent storm. Her resolve never wavered. Every setback was anticipated, every risk calculated. She was no longer the victim, she was the reckoning. As months turned to years, the man became a shadow of his former self. The empire he had built was crumbling, his name tarnished beyond repair. He tried to rebuild, to fight, to reclaim what was lost. But the forces against him were too many, too coordinated, too relentless. He was left with nothing but memories of power and betrayal. with no one to turn to, no sanctuary to hide in. The fear that had once haunted his dreams now consumed his waking hours. He was alone, broken, and defeated. And somewhere in the quiet distance she smiled. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice served. The reckoning was complete. The downfall was no longer a distant possibility, but an inevitable reality closing in with relentless certainty. The man who had once stood atop his world now struggled to maintain even the illusion of control. Every attempt to regain footing only revealed new fractures, fresh wounds beneath the surface. She had become a force not just of vengeance, but of transformation. Her carefully crafted strategy had exposed the rot beneath the polished exterior. The walls he had built to protect himself crumbled, brick by brick, under the weight of consequences he had never anticipated. His relationships disintegrated. Those he once called allies turned away with quiet indifference or open contempt. Trust, which had been his greatest weapon, was now the rarest commodity. Invitations ceased. Calls were ignored. Doors closed softly but definitively behind him. He found himself wandering through the ruins of a life built on deception, greed, and cold calculation. Financial ruin followed social exile. Deals fell through. Accounts were frozen. Partners demanded answers he could no longer provide. The web of lies he had spun began to unravel, thread by thread, each revelation more damning than the last. His empire, built on shaky foundations and selfish ambition, collapsed under its own weight. But it was not just the external world that betrayed him. The real destruction was inside. His mind became a battlefield. Anxiety gnawed at his thoughts. Paranoia clouded his judgment. Nightmares invaded his sleep. He became a man haunted not by ghosts but by his own conscience, now awakened to the extent of his failures and betrayals. He no longer recognized the reflection in the mirror. The confident gaze was replaced by eyes filled with doubt and despair. The sharp features softened into lines of exhaustion and regret. The man who had once believed himself untouchable now found himself vulnerable in every sense. She watched from the shadows, a silent observer of the unraveling. Her revenge was complete not in destruction alone, but in the transformation it forced upon him. He was no longer the man who had hurt her. He was something diminished, broken, stripped of pretense. But even as his world fell apart, she did not let her guard down. Revenge was a path without end. There were always consequences, echoes of past wounds, scars that refused to heal. She fortified her new life with resilience and purpose, refusing to become what she once was, a victim. Her days were no longer consumed by thoughts of him, but by the quiet strength she had cultivated. She built new alliances, nurtured trust, and reclaimed the parts of herself that had been lost in the storm. The pain remained, but it no longer defined her. In the silence that followed his fall, she found clarity. Revenge had been a crucible, forging her into something new. A woman who knew her worth, who understood the power of patience and precision, who had learned that true victory was not in the moment of triumph but in the long, steady reclaiming of oneself. And so, while he faded into obscurity, she rose. Not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. Not as a wielder of vengeance, but as a bearer of peace born from the ashes of betrayal. The final chapter was not marked by grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It unfolded quietly, almost imperceptibly, as the last remnants of the past slipped away like shadows at dawn. The man who had once dominated every room now moved through life like a ghost, unseen, unheard, forgotten. She had long ceased to chase him, to watch him, to plot. The fire that once burned with a fierce desire for retribution had cooled into a steady flame of resolve. What remained was not hatred, but understanding, a deep, unshakable knowledge that justice had its own time and way. Her world was no longer defined by him, or by what he had done. It was defined by what she had become. Stronger, wiser, whole. The scars she carried were reminders, not burdens. Proof that survival was possible, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. In her new life, she found peace not in revenge fulfilled but in freedom reclaimed. The chains of past pain were broken, and with them fell the weight of anger and regret. She walked forward without looking back, each step lighter than the last. The man faded from memory like a distant storm, a lesson learned through fire and shadow. He remained a cautionary tale of arrogance and cruelty, a symbol of what happens when one underestimates the quiet strength of those they wrong. And in the silence that followed, she discovered something unexpected. Hope. Hope that even in the darkest of nights, the dawn will come. That even in the deepest wounds, healing is possible. That even after the most bitter of battles, peace can be found. Her story ended not with vengeance, but with renewal. A testament to resilience, to the power of patience, and to the quiet dignity of reclaiming one's life after it has been shattered. She was no longer defined by the past. She was defined by the future she chose, one forged from strength, courage, and the unyielding will to rise again.